girl named Satya and her brother Ankur arrive home from school, only to see their dad standing just by the balcony. As they wonder what he's doing there, he falls off the building to kill himself, and Satya quickly hugs her brother so that he won't see what their dad has just done. After their father's death, which makes them an orphan since their mom is also dead, Satya and Ankur are taken to live with a rich relative in another part of India.
Sorry, Satya.
Many years later, Satya is now older and she works as a house staff manager for her rich uncle, Mr. Mehtani. During a wedding at the house, Satya convinces a family member named Nakul to marry his rich bride instead of trying to run away with his poor girlfriend. She mentions that his future in-laws are very dangerous people and they'll kill his girlfriend and child if he runs away and refuses to marry their daughter.
तू प्यार करता है?
Nakul eventually agrees to go through with the wedding, and Satya helps Mr. Mehtani settle Nakul's girlfriend with some money and a trip to London. After this, Mr. Mehtani thanks Satya for always taking her job seriously. He also tells her to change into her party attire since there's a wedding at the house. Satya says she'll do this, but as she's about to walk away, Mr. Mehtani asks about Ankur and says he hasn't seen him since the party started. Satya doesn't say anything, but Mr. Mehtani mentions that Ankur should be at the party.
Where's Ankur?
After Satya changes into her party clothes, she heads over to Ankur's room and sees him working on his computer. Ankur is now an engineering graduate who is developing a computer software. As Satya sits with him, he talks about how his software is ready for release. He then asks if Satya thinks their uncle will invest in him, and she says she's sure of it.
कोई भी तेरा pitch क्यों नहीं सुनेगा?
Almost immediately, Ankur's phone rings, and it turns out to be a call from Mr. Mehtani's son, Kabir, who is schooling in Melbourne. Satya doesn't like Kabir because she believes he could be a bad influence on her brother. Since he used an Indian number to call, Satya asks if Kabir has been expelled again, but Ankur says he doesn't know. He adds that Kabir is back in India, but he wants to skip the wedding and return to the house the next day. Ankur then mentions that he wants to go to a party Kabir invited him to. Satya says he can't go and he asks when she'll stop treating him like a child.
How am I responsible for that?
Satya doesn't say anything, but as she's about to leave the room, she mentions that she'll let Ankur go to the party if he beats her in a game of basketball. Ankur accepts the challenge, but as he starts losing, he walks away because he knows Satya doesn't want him to go anywhere.
नहीं जा रहा मैं. खुश?
The next morning, Kabir arrives home and goes straight to wake Ankur up. The boys look excited to see each other, and Kabir mentions that he has already told his dad about Ankur's software and that he needs to do a presentation about it. Shortly after, the boys head down for the presentation, and Mr. Mehtani is impressed with Ankur's software. He then mentions that he has a friend who would like to invest in the software. Kabir looks happy for Ankur, and he also gets Satya to rejoice with them. He then asks his dad if he's sure they'll get the investment offer, and Mr. Mehtani tells them to pack their things to go for a meeting with his friend in a country called Hanshidao.
Destination Hanshida.
He also tells Satya to book a charter flight for the boys. After she does this, the boys prepare to leave, and Satya tells Ankur to focus on what he's going to do. She also says she doesn't want him to do anything unnecessary in Hanshidao, but Ankur doesn't get why she won't let him try to live a little. He eventually hugs her before they leave for the airport, and after a while, the boys arrive in Hanshidao. A while later, they meet up with Mr. Mehtani's friend, and he agrees to invest in Ankur's software.
They'll be alright.
Yes.
Ankur and Kabir are happy about this, and they go around Hanshidao to have fun. They eventually stop at a club, and while Ankur is enjoying himself, Kabir buys some drugs from someone inside. After they leave the club, they suddenly notice that some cops are chasing them. Ankur looks scared and wonders if it's because they were speeding. Kabir tells him to remain calm because he'll handle the cops.
जेल तो नहीं होगी ना? रुक जा.
When he stops the car, the cops tell them to stand outside, and even though Kabir says there's nothing with him, they eventually find drugs in his pocket. Ankur is shocked by this, but before he says anything, they're both taken to the police station. After a while, Kabir calls his dad, and he sends a lawyer named Jaswant to help save his son and Ankur. Jaswant then tells Mr. Metani that the case won't be easy because Hanshi Dao doesn't show mercy to drug offenders, and they're usually killed. He adds that he can only save one of them, and Mr. Metani tells him to do whatever he can.
Do your best.
Shortly after, Ankur calls his sister and reports what happened. She asks if he was dealing drugs, but he says he was not the one. Kabir's mom and dad eventually collect the phone to ask about Kabir because they've not been able to reach him. Mr. Metani also tells Ankur that Jaswant is already on his way to make things better.
नहीं मैंने कुछ नहीं किया.
Shortly after, Jaswant goes to meet Kabir in the interrogation room. He then tells Kabir that he'll have to lie to the cops that the drugs belong to Ankur. Kabir says he can't do it because Ankur is like a brother to him, but Jaswant asks if he wants to die. Kabir says he doesn't want to,
Of course I will.
and that Jaswant should do whatever he can to get him out. Following this, Kabir testifies against his friend, and while Ankur is waiting to get an update on what's happening, Jaswant comes over to meet him. He then tells Ankur that he needs to tell the cops that the drugs belong to him. He adds that Kabir has 2 previous drug charges on his record, and he could go to prison for a long time if he gets a 3rd one. Ankur looks concerned about what it could do to his career, but Jawant says he needs to be worried about Kabir.
So what are you saying?
He also mentions that Ankur will be sent to jail for just 3 months if he confesses that the drugs belong to him. After a while, Ankur agrees to do it, and Kabir is freed. Ankur is then charged to court, and as he pleads guilty to the crime, the judge sentences him to death by electrocution in 3 months. Ankur is shocked to hear this, and he says there has to be a mistake. He also shouts that he's innocent, but no one listens to him.
This has to be a mistake. It's not me.
Shortly after, Ankur is taken to a fully automated prison. As he's about to undergo an inspection before he's taken to his cell, he tells the prison guard to change his gloves, but he refuses. Ankur fights against this, and the prison warden, Landa, eventually says he'll do it for him. Ankur then tries to explain his situation to Landa, but the warden says he doesn't care. After he's done with the inspection, he gives Ankur his clothes and a book containing the prison rules. With this, Ankur is taken to his cell to begin his wait for his execution in 3 months.
Sir, मैंने कुछ नहीं किया.
Elsewhere, Satya hears about what happened and gets ready to leave for Hanshi Dao so that she can try to get her brother out. As she packs her things, she tells one of the workers at the house to tell Mr. Mehtani to send some money to her account and also arrange a charter flight for her. Shortly after, she heads to the airport, and as Kabir gets off the plane, he hugs her and says sorry for what happened. Satya doesn't react to this, but Jaswant also tells her that he did his best to save Ankur. Satya doesn't believe him, but she walks away to board the plane.
We tried everything.
Just as she enters, Jaswant gets a call that Mr. Mehtani's office is on fire, and it turns out that Satya was the one who did it. On her flight to Hanshi Dao, Satya can't stop thinking about what happened to her dad. She also has a dream in which she sees Ankur falling from the balcony.
Give me everything.
Shortly after, Satya arrives Hanshi Dao and heads to the prison to see her brother. She's initially made to wait for a few hours, but when it's her turn, one of the prison guards says she'll have to make an application for a televisit the next time she's around. Satya agrees to do this and heads in to see her brother.
How do I look?
When Ankur shows up, his hair has already been shaved, and Satya looks sad to see the way her brother looks. As he sits down, he starts crying and tells Satya that they'll kill him soon. Even though Satya looks sad, she tells him not to be worried because she'll never let any harm come to him. After she leaves, Satya collects Ankur's file and starts going to meet different lawyers to see if they can help her brother. Unfortunately, most of them turn her down, and someone tells her that it will be hard to get Ankur out of prison because the government of Hanshi Dao likes to make an example out of immigrants. At the prison, Landa also tells all the inmates on death row to tell their families not to waste any time trying to get them out because nothing they do will work.
तू मेरे प्रोटेक्शन में है.
After a few days, Satya meets a lawyer who says the only way she can help Ankur is to file an appeal to keep delaying his execution. Elsewhere, an inmate named Ryan tries to talk to Ankur to get to know him, but he doesn't respond. This gets Ryan pissed, and as he attacks Ankur, Landa sees him. He then tells his men to give Ryan 10 lashes for trying to start a fight. As they're carrying him away, Ankur feels sorry for him and tells Landa that he's not following the rules.
Sir! Those are not the rules, sir!
Landa is shocked to hear this, and Ankur also looks scared. Landa then asks what the rules say, and Ankur mentions that he's only supposed to resort to flogging if an inmate has been warned first. Landa says it's good that Ankur has read the rulebook very well. He then tells his men to leave Ryan alone. After they leave, Ryan thanks Ankur and says he owes him for helping him. Later that night, Satya rents an apartment close to the prison so that it will be easy for her to get there whenever she needs to visit Ankur. The next day, Satya goes for her scheduled televisit with Ankur. As she tells him that she's working with some lawyers to delay his execution, Ankur mentions that some of the other inmates have told him that it's just a waste of time because no one ever gets out. He adds that the guards even make him clean the electric chair despite knowing how traumatic it would be for him since he's on death row. Satya eventually leaves looking disappointed, and in the night, she sees that some people are gathered in front of the prison to release lanterns into the sky. She then heads over there to watch what's happening. After a while, Satya asks a man named Bhatia what the lanterns are meant for.
कोई protest चल रहा है इधर?
And he says it's a part of their tradition. He adds that people are releasing the lanterns to seek blessings and hope for their loved ones to be pardoned. Satya then asks if he has anyone inside the prison, and he says that his son is there. Satya says her brother is also inside, and Bhatia invites her to join a counseling session with some other people who have innocent relatives in prison. Even though she's initially reluctant about it, Satya eventually agrees to follow him. During the session, the counselor talks about how people need to learn how to take on suffering without complaining. Satya then jokes with Bhatia and asks if the counselor will complain if she punches him.
इसको एक पंच मारो तो कंप्लेन नहीं करेगा?
A man named Muthu hears this and tells her to leave if she doesn't believe in what the session is about. Satya remains quiet for a while, but she eventually stands up to leave after Muthu goes to the restroom. Bhatia tries to tell her to wait, and the counselor eventually asks what's going on. Satya talks about how she's not interested in what he's saying. She adds that she'd rather bomb the prison than accept that her brother will die there. As the counselor tries to convince her otherwise, some thugs enter the room to disrupt the session and send everyone away. While everyone gets ready to leave, Satya stays back to confront the leader of the thugs. He threatens to hurt her with his knife, but Satya doesn't look scared. She eventually injures him with the knife. And as his gang members are about to retaliate, Bhatia brings out his gun and scares them away. Muthu eventually returns from the restroom and tells someone to call the police on Bhatia for having a gun. Bhatia then confesses that the gun is not loaded and he only used it to scare the thugs away. As they're about to leave, Bhatia tells Satya that she's the kind of thug he would have recruited to his gang if he was still in one. After a while, they sit together at a bar, and Bhatia explains that his son, Tony, got arrested because he was at the wrong place at the wrong time. He then asks about Satya's brother, and she says he was taken for granted by the people they trusted. She adds that she doesn't really want to think about it because she's only concerned about getting her brother out. Bhatia jokes that they can bomb the prison just like she suggested, but Satya laughs and asks if he's serious. He says he is, and that they can plan a jailbreak. Satya agrees to do this, but before they start making plans, it turns out that Muthu is seated next to them and has heard everything they talked about. He then tells them that a jailbreak is impossible because of how the place was built. He adds that he took many criminals there before he retired as a cop. Satya believes he can be of help on their mission.
To help us.
So she tells him to join her and Bhatia in breaking their loved ones out of the prison. Muthu says the place is impenetrable and that they need to forget about whatever they're planning. As he leaves, Satya asks Bhatia if he knows Muthu's story, but he says they can find out. The next day, Bhatia finds out that Muthu wrongfully put an innocent boy named Chandan in prison, and it's why he also retired as a cop. After she learns about this, Satya meets Muthu again to try to convince him to work with her and Bhatia to break Tony, Chandan, and Ankur out of prison. Since he's a retired cop who knows the prison well, Satya believes he'll be valuable to their team, but Muthu says he's not interested. He adds that he believes in the legal system, and it's why he has filed an appeal to delay Chandan's execution. He also mentions that Satya should keep fighting for her brother if she believes he's innocent.
I will report you to the authorities now.
Satya says the system won't help them until they do something, but as he still seems stubborn, she pushes him and challenges him to a fight. Even though he initially says he's not interested, he beats her and knocks her to the ground. He then receives a text from a lawyer who tells him that the appeal he filed for Chandan has been rejected. He looks disappointed by this, but before he knows what's happening, Satya stands up and knocks him out. When he wakes up, Satya apologizes for what she did, but he says it's not a problem. He then says he's interested in her jailbreak plan.
Don't be. I'm in.
Shortly after, Muthu joins Satya and Bhatia in analyzing the prison's blueprint. They then discover that there's a way the boys can get out through a manhole cover in the town, but they'll have to dig a tunnel first. Following this, Satya and her partners start digging a tunnel near the prison. As they go through their plans again, Satya mentions that when the boys are free, they'll take a boat to cross the Malaysian border because the Hanshi Dao police aren't allowed there. Bhatia says the Malaysian Coast Guard might be a problem for them, but Muthu says he has a friend who can help them.
यही फंसेंगे.
He also mentions that he'll have to tell his friend about their plans so that he'll know how to help them. After a while, Muthu speaks to his friend, and he agrees to let them cross the border if they disguise themselves as volunteers from a group called Doctors Without Borders. Since everything looks set for them, Satya and her partners start wondering how they'll get the boys to volunteer for kitchen duty because it's close to the tunnel.
मसाला मूवी थोड़ी बना रहे हैं.
The next day, Satya goes to see Ankur, and she tells him to start a countdown because he'll soon go home. Ankur tells her not to worry about him and that she should take care of herself. Satya thinks there's something wrong with him, and she asks if there's anyone troubling him in the prison. He says he's fine, but it turns out that a few days earlier, Landa found a hook Ankur made for his wet clothes, and he decided to punish him for it because it's against the rules. Unfortunately,
Rules are, my friend.
Landa gets Ryan to volunteer to flog Ankur for him. Even though Ryan doesn't like this, he's left with no choice but to do what he's told. In the present day, Satya asks if Ankur has friends, and he says he already has a few people he talks to. Interestingly, it turns out that after Ankur's punishment the other day, Ryan decided to bring him on board with his plan to break out of prison through an old, unused toilet in the medical ward.
बाहर कौन है तेरा?
Ankur is shocked by this, but Ryan tells him not to tell anyone, including his sister. Coincidentally, Ryan's partners in the jailbreak include Tony and Chandan, as well as another man named Matthew. After a while, Ryan gets Ankur transferred to volunteer at the infirmary so that he can join the rest of the team in digging a tunnel that leads to a manhole cover they can escape through.
तो अपने घर जाएगा.
In the present day, Satya eventually ends her conversation with her brother before heading home. A while later, Matthew gets executed, and Landa shows his last photograph to Ryan, Ankur, Chandan, and Tony. They're all shocked by this because Matthew didn't tell them anything, and Landa says he's also surprised because he thought they were all close. After he leaves them, Ryan says that Matthew likely didn't tell them because he knew they would have wanted to dig the tunnel faster to help him, even though it would put them at risk of getting caught. Ryan then tells the others to start a countdown because they'll be leaving in 15 days.
उल्टी गिनती शुरू कर दो.
The next day, Muthu and Bhatia also agree that the best time to execute their plan will be in 15 days' time because it coincides with the Hungry Ghost Festival, which is also a day that most police officers will be off duty. As they continue to work on their plan,
अब तो पूरी होगी मन्नत।
They hire someone to go to prison as one of the new recruits who will be working in the kitchen. With this, Chandan, Tony, and Ankur are placed on kitchen duty, and this leaves them surprised. Ryan asks Tony if his father has anything to do with it, but he says he's sure Bhatia can't do something like that. Unfortunately, this derails their plan, and Ryan is sent to volunteer in the infirmary with new inmates. The next day, Bhatia writes a coded message to Tony and gets their inside man to put it in his son's food so that he'll be aware of their plan. Satya and Muthu wonder if Tony will get the message, and Bhatia says he will.
सब कुछ इसी पर डिपेंडेंट है भाटिया।
The next day, he heads to prison to see if his son got the message. Unfortunately, he's told that Tony is in the medical ward, and Bhatia can't believe this because their jailbreak plan won't work if his son doesn't get the message.
I have to meet my son. He in medical ward.
It then turns out that after Ankur and the others were assigned to kitchen duty, Ryan gave them a chemical to add to their food so that they'll be sent to the infirmary, after which they'll proceed with their plan and leave the prison when it's time. Unfortunately, Tony ate his food without seeing the message his dad left for him. When Bhatia returns home, he looks disappointed and says they won't be able to do anything after the Hungry Ghost Festival because that's the major factor that will make their jailbreak attempt successful. Satya also looks sad about this, and even though she tries to hurt herself so that she'll be able to see Ankur, Muthu advises her against doing something like that. On the day of the Hungry Ghost Festival, Ryan and the others sneak out of the infirmary and head into the tunnel in the old toilet. As they're about to start crawling out, a prison guard shows up in the old toilet, but it turns out that she's actually Ryan's girlfriend, and she's the one who helped make their plan easy to execute. Shortly after, the boys escape through the manhole cover and look happy to be free. Coincidentally, Landa finds out that Chandan, Tony, and Ankur have been assigned to the kitchen and infirmary at the same time. He finds this suspicious and heads out to look for them. The next day, a letter is delivered to Satya's apartment, and she realizes that Ankur's execution date has been moved forward. It then turns out that after they escaped, Landa sent out their pictures to the cops in the city to find them. They eventually got caught, but as Ryan refuses to go down without a fight, he gets killed while the others are sent back to prison. Muthu and Bhatia also get letters to inform them about Chandan and Tony's new execution dates. A few days later, Landa calls them to come and collect the last photographs of Ankur, Chandan, and Tony before they're executed. Later that night, while Bhatia complains about having his son's last picture,
कौन फोटो भेजता है?
Satya says they can't just give up yet. She then suggests shutting down the power in the prison to make sure the execution doesn't happen. Muthu doesn't think this will work because the prison has solid backup generators, but Satya says they can shut them down too. Muthu doesn't agree with this plan because all the prisoners will be able to escape since the doors are automated. Satya says she doesn't care as long as Chandan, Tony, and Ankur are among those who escape. Muthu says he can't let 6,000 prisoners escape from the prison, but Satya tells him not to stand in her way if he won't help her. Muthu eventually walks away, and even though Bhatia doesn't understand how the plan will work, he agrees to help Satya. He then sells some of his things to make some money to buy a few things and hire a group of thugs to help them. After a while, they kidnap the family of a man who works for the power company. He's then told to shut down the power supply in the city before he'll get his family back. Meanwhile, Satya joins some of Bhatia's men to stage a fake crash so that they can dilute the fuel being transported to the prison for their generators. After this is done,
अब यही अपना सेट है।
Satya rides her bike away from the scene, but Muthu suddenly shows up beside her and says he can't let her do what she wants to do. As he's about to call the police chief, Satya knocks him off his bike and they start fighting. Muthu beats Satya quite well, but she eventually pushes him off a cliff to kill him. Satya cannot believe what she has done, but she still seems bent on saving her brother. Later that night, Bhatia tells Satya that it's time to go to the prison. Shortly after, the entire city's power goes off, but the the prison's generators continue working. Inside there, Shandan, Ankur, and Tony are taken to the execution room where Landa is waiting for them. He then talks about how he's happy to get rid of them because they disrespected him by trying to escape. Elsewhere, Satya doesn't get why the prison's generators are still on, so she suggests driving some trucks loaded with gas cylinders toward the prison. Bhatia thinks it's too risky, but Satya says it's what they have to do.
क्रैश कर देते हैं।
Just as Ankur and his friends sit in the electric chair, Satya sends the trucks with gas cylinders toward the prison. Some prison guards notice the strange movement outside the prison, and they start shooting at the trucks. Unfortunately, Landa's walkie-talkie is not with him inside the execution room, so he's unable to hear what's going on. The trucks eventually crash into the prison's generators, and this causes a blackout in the prison. Ankur and the others look relieved, and Landa finally gets information on what's happening. He eventually tells his men to leave him with Ankur, Chandan, and Tony because he'll still kill them. The boys eventually free themselves and they start fighting Landa. Elsewhere, the inmates in the prison unlock their doors and attack the prison guards. Satya drives toward the prison and eventually crashes her car in front of the gate. She survives the crash and encourages the inmates to keep fighting the prison guards. She then makes her way inside to find Ankur and his friends. Meanwhile, the boys escape through the opening at the top of the execution room, but Landa still follows them. Unfortunately, they're no match for him in a fight, and he ends up beating them. As he's about to kill them by strangling their necks, Satya shows up and shoots a smoke grenade at him. This weakens him, and Satya reunites with her brother, who looks happy to see her. She then leads the boys toward the exit where Bhatia is supposed to pick them up. Bhatia doesn't get there in time, but as the prison guards are about to get to them, he comes inside to save them. As they enter the van, the prison guards shoot at them, but Bhatia eventually drives away. The guards still chase them with cop cars, and after a while, Satya sees that Bhatia is bleeding because he was shot earlier. This makes her sad, but she goes to help him steer the car in the right direction. He then says he'll create a distraction to keep the cops off their backs so that she'll have enough time to take the boys to the docks on her own.
सवाल जवाब का टाइम नहीं है सत्या।
Satya wants him to come along, but he says it's not worth it. He then calls for Tony and tells him to enjoy his life just like he did. Tony looks sad to see his dad dying, but as they lose the cops, Bhatia tells them to leave the van and continue their journey using a backup car. After they leave, the cops are unaware that Bhatia is the only one left inside the van. Before they get closer to the van, Bhatia crushes them before he dies. Meanwhile, Satya and the boys wash their faces and change their clothes to scrubs meant for doctors. They then enter a fake police vehicle, which they use to get to the docks. No one recognizes them, and they enter the boat to begin their journey to Malaysia. As they reach the border, Satya tries to contact the Malaysian Coast Guard to inform them that she and the boys are doctors who are trying to get to Malaysia. She doesn't get any response, and out of nowhere, someone shoots the boat until it stops working. It turns out to be Landa, and as he heads toward them with his men, Satya realizes that there's no way she and the boys can escape anymore. She then stands in front of Ankur and closes her eyes as she expects to be shot by Landa. Interestingly, the Malaysian Coast Guard officers reach the scene and shoot down Landa's boat because he has wrongfully crossed the border. He gets killed in the process, and as the Malaysian officers tell Landa's men to return to their country, Satya looks relieved. It then turns out that Muthu's friend helped them just as planned. Satya cannot believe this, and she cries while telling Ankur that they can finally head home. Shortly after, Satya and the boys return to the old house where she saw her dad kill himself. Satya then walks to the balcony, and as she turns back, Ankur smiles at her. After Satya's brother is jailed for a crime he didn't commit, she leaves India and heads to Hanshi Dao to find a way to get him out. Despite her attempts to get a lawyer to take up Ankur's case, no one seemed ready to help her. Since the Hanshi Dao cops are known to punish immigrants unjustly, Satya is left with no other option but to attempt a daunting jailbreak to save Ankur. She eventually succeeded in doing this and returned to her childhood home instead of going to meet her uncle, who didn't mind seeing her brother get executed for his son's crime.